Hello, my dear student. So this is Dr. Ameer, and today we have a brief introduction to the Victorian Age and poetry. Have a close reading to the passages that I posted on our classroom that should tell you much about the contents of the Victorian poetry. In British history, Victorian Age is generally referred to the period between approximately 1820 and 1914, corresponding roughly but not exactly to the period of Queen Victoria's reign, 1937-1901. This is why this period is called the Victorian Age. This period is characterized by a class-based society, a growing number of people able to vote, a growing state and economy, and Britain's status as the most powerful empire in the world. During the Victorian period, Britain was a powerful nation with a rich culture. It had a stable government, a growing state, and an expanding franchise. It also controlled a large empire, and it was wealthy in part because of its degree of industrialization and its imperial holdings, and in spite of the fact that 3/4 of or more of its population was working class. Late in the period, Britain began to decline as a global political and economic power relative to other major powers, particularly the United States, but this decline was not acutely noticeable until after World War II. The Victorian Age witnessed a dramatic upheavals in politics, society, religion, and economics. In politics, during this age, people began revolting against monarchy, the king. Democracy was dominant to the extent that this age is called an age of democracy. In 1832, an important political shift or reformation took place with the appearance of the Reform Bill. Before this bill, the lower class did not have the right to vote. This bill gave them this right, meaning the right to vote. Socially, the English society during this period was disintegrated. People were busy all the time working outdoors in factories because of the Industrial Revolution. This weakened the social and familial ties, as people mostly had no time to see each other or exchange visits. Moreover, unregulated industrialization created a great prosperity for the lucky few, but great misery for the masses. As far as religion during the Victorian Age is concerned, most Victorian Britons were Christians. The Anglican churches of England, Wales, and Ireland were the state churches, of which the monarch was the nominal head, and dominated the religious landscape, even though the majority of Welsh and Irish people were members of other churches. The Church of Scotland and Presbyterian. The Church of Scotland was a Presbyterian. There was some religious diversity, as Britain also was home to other non-Anglican Protestants, notably Methodists, Roman Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and others. At the end of the period, of course, there were even a few atheists. Alongside their faith, Victorians made and appreciated developments in science. The best known Victorian scientific development is that of the theory of evolution. It is typically credited to Charles Darwin, but versions of it were developed by earlier thinkers as well. Victorians were also fascinated by the emerging discipline of psychology and by physics and energy. The Victorian Age accordingly witnessed a conflict between science and religion. Two important factors affected religion then: the Industrial Revolution and scientific progress. Although the Industrial Revolution began even before the Romantic Age, its progress reached its highest point toward the middle of the 19th century. This led to a clear sense of religious skepticism. English people wanted to understand everything in their life from a scientific point of view. What profound that sense of skepticism in the English society is the appearance of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, or Darwinism. In his book, The Origin of Species, Darwin claims that all living beings, including man, had what is called primitive origins, and they developed with the passage of time. Accordingly, people believe that the origin of man is ape. This goes in a sheer contrast with the teachings of Christianity. This is what caused the conflict between religion and science. In literature, this age, the Victorian Age, is called a transitional age, as it witnessed a transition, or the literary transition from Romanticism to modernity. All in all, the poetry during this period can be classified into three groups. The first group appeared close to the end of classicism, or the end of Romanticism, and wrote poetry between 1930 and 1950. In this poetry, the impact of Romanticism is so clear. The poetry of the second group, which was written between 1850 and 1870, is typically Victorian, both in form and content. The third group, that wrote from 1870 onwards, paved the way for the emergence of modernity in English literature. This is why the Victorian Age in literature is called a transitional age, as literary traditions had progressed from Romanticism to modernity. The characteristics of the Victorian poetry. The Victorians believed that the aim of literature is essentially moral, as this literature emerged in an atmosphere heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution, the rise of democracy, and the rise of evolutionary theory and science, which had a clear impact on the religious faith then. Thus, objectivity, realism, and dramaticality are the three major features of the Romantic poetry. Due to the previously discussed socio-political religious circumstances, the Victorian poets were obliged to be highly objective and serious poets. The Victorian poets realized that due to the socio-political, economic, and religious problems, their poetry should be more dedicated to tackle these problems rather than personal issues or problems. This gives their poetry a realistic tone. The language of the Victorian poetry, or poets used in their poetry, is realistically the language of the common people to make their message come across easily. The third feature is dramaticality. Most Victorian poems are written in the form of a dramatic monologue that goes with the dramatic zeal of the Victorian poets. The themes of the Victorian poetry. The Victorian Age's poetry recurring themes are the religious science conflict and its interest in medieval fables and legends. This poetry also reflects the changing attitude toward the various concerns of the Victorian society. Among the major Victorian poets, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, and Dante Rossetti, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and the rest. Thank you.